Good morning, afternoon, evening. Welcome to another edition of the best DFS show that just happens to start at 8 Eastern Standard Time. My name is Rob Diamond, Rad Rob Diamond on Twitter, Sir Robert6 on all the main sites. And like I said, welcome to another EPL breakdown brought to you by RotoPros.com. So I don't want to waste any more time. Jump right into it here today. We are talking about the main slate for Saturday, November 10th, 2018 for DraftKings and FanDuel. So yeah, let's jump right over there. I realized I haven't been winning, not because I'm bad at DFS. It's not that at all. But because I haven't changed my desktop picture. And Felix Potvin was great and all, but I decided to revert back to what I know best, which is Anfield. So as you can see, I have a really nice picture of Anfield up here today. I'm pretty excited about this weekend. I'm pretty excited about this slate. I think there's going to be a whole bunch of different things that we're going to be able to do. Whether you want a Harry Kane or not, it all depends on how the next 24 hours really plays out. So what I wanted to do here basically is just jump right into this. Here's the slate breakdown. So basically, as it stands, West Ham United are traveling to Huddersfield Town to take on the completely inept offense of Huddersfield. Burnley traveled to Leicester City for Leicester's first home game following the death of their owner. Bournemouth are at Newcastle for what I think is going to be another really sneaky Newcastle home game. Watford travel to Southampton, which again is another really sneaky game due to the way DraftKings has priced this slate. And finally, the late hammer game is the Tottenham traveling to Crystal Palace. And this game in particular is going to define really the way we're going to build and attack this slate, mostly due to the fact that it may end up that Spurs rest a lot of their players following their midweek comeback, including and not limited to Dele Alli and Christian Eriksen. So we'll get to that a little bit more later, but for now, let's just jump right into this. Excuse me. First game of the slate, West Ham at Huddersfield. So basically, as this breaks down right now, Huddersfield are one of the worst offenses in the league. Last weekend, their win against Fulham was not only their first win of the season, but their first home goal since April of last year. This is not a team that you have to fear as a home favorite in any situation. And the fact that Fabianski isn't the most expensive keeper of the slate makes him an absolute steal and a borderline must play in either format. I think it makes a little bit more sense to take him in cash because he has stackable defensive options that work in cash. And at the same time, in a GPP, there's nothing to say Huddersfield can't score at home. West Ham carry enough risk as West Ham. They are particularly poor at home, so we don't really have to worry about that too much this slate. But at the same time, they're very prone to just falling apart and not showing up to games whatsoever. So as such, I'm not as bullish for Fabianski in cash as maybe I would otherwise, but he still makes a really solid play in either format because there's a really solid chance he's not letting in a goal. West Ham are always going to be bad enough where they will allow teams to shoot the ball, but never Fabianski will never be bad enough that he'll let them all in unless it's like a Man City or something to that extent. Now, in terms of defense, there's a couple of different ways we can go about this. If Cresswell starts, it is frustrating because he's supposed to be one of the most solid crossing floors in the league, as you can see, but he really hasn't been that yet. So there's really no reason to take him. And unfortunately, there's lots of reason to take him because he could simply just explode for 12 to 14 crosses out of nowhere. So it is a serious concern for me, but I will be fading him for the most part. But if I do take him, it'll strictly be in cash and trying to get a hold of his cross count. In terms of the other way you can go about this is taking Hadagajong at only 4.3K. His salary is a little bit higher than normally what I would expect to be closer to the 3.6 to 3.9 range. But in terms of someone that's not going to finish zero and still has the chance to get 6 to 8 fantasy points, Hadagajong is absolutely in play every slate, despite opponent. And this slate, he potentially gets a little bit of an uptick against a super unreliable and unpredictable West Ham team. But in terms of the attack, there's only really one team to look towards, and it's definitely West Ham. Across the board, these guys all make excellent play. Last slate, the winning stack was Felipe Anderson and Arnautovic. So there's no reason to suggest they can't do that again against a team such as Huddersfield's caliber. At the same time, Robert Snodgrass has been doing well to be borderline cash viable, especially if he keeps getting 90 minutes. Double digits isn't a big ask for him at all, and his massive cross count. What's most impressive is that he usually doesn't take these in corners. They're usually open plays. So that's just something to consider in terms of this is literally a very true floor in the sense that he doesn't have any kind of plus EV scenarios that he's working through. Diangana is another guy that you can absolutely go with in GPP this slate at only 4.8K. He doesn't really have the floor yet to be truly relied upon in cash. It's getting very close. Especially with his salary still sub 5K. If you fell on it, it isn't the worst cash play this slate by any means because his minutes are improving. But in terms of West Ham, with all their injuries, they still do have a few guys that can fit in and come in and take minutes away. But really, one of the first places you should be looking this slate, especially if there's no Christian Eriksen, is Arnautovic for West Ham. Basically, if West Ham score, there's an 80% chance Arnautovic is involved. And that's because he is involved in 80% of West Ham's goals. And it's been like this now for a couple seasons to the point he's basically all West Ham have up front. And when he's not up front, West Ham really don't have much going for them. So by all means, feel free to get Arnautovic into your cash or GPP cards this slate. Is he a lock? No, I think there's like one or two players better than him in either format, but that's absolutely not to say like fade him. By every means, you have to play Arnautovic somewhere this weekend. So there isn't really a whole lot to look at in terms of Huddersfield because their attack is so brutal. But they do have a couple of mingling cash plays in the likes of Philip Billing at 5.1K. His salary is a little bit slightly higher than I'd prefer to be on the other side of 5K. But in terms of a floor, there's very few people in the league that produce the kind of peripheral stat floor like Philip Billing does without goals or assists. So if you're looking for someone who's going to play significant minutes against a team that could get a little bit of an uptick, because West Ham are just so unpredictable, you never really know. And they're not so good to the point that they're going to absolutely ruin another team outside of the other team's keeper, that is. But yeah, I really do like this game a lot. We'll take a look at it here in FanDuel for 1 sec. Bring that over. There we go. So yeah, over here, one of the things that stood out to me most is that Fabianski was below 5K, and I think that's a pretty big steal, especially him and Kasper Schmeichel basically make two of the better keeper plays this slate at that salary. There are obviously some decent keeper plays, but in terms of two really solid options that are probably underpriced on FanDuel, you can instantly click on Fabianski and you know you'll be okay. I definitely won't be taking any, sorry about that. Back to the West Ham game. There we go. I won't be taking any defense from this game. In particular, I think a lot of people will try and get cute with the Huddersfield center backs, and West Ham really aren't that much of a crossing team anymore. They're more of a through ball team, through the likes of Philippe Anderson to Arnautovic. Now, Snodgrass definitely puts in a lot of crosses, so you could make that argument. But at the same time, I would much assume Philippe Anderson be the vocal point over Snodgrass, who will struggle to regularly meet a 90-minute game. Philip Billing, as you can see, is a little bit higher priced over here. Aaron Moy is also involved too. But yeah, in terms of, again, the forward list in FanDuel is usually pretty thin, and that's the case once more. This slate is pretty heavy loaded up top. So basically, anytime you're not able to afford Harry Kane in either site, feel free just to roll with Arnautovic, especially in DraftKings where you get him on the midfield forward range. That way you can kind of spend down a little bit. I still like lots of midfielders this slate, but we'll get going there eventually. In terms of West Ham, though, I really think this is probably somewhere between a 2-1 to 3-0 kind of win for West Ham. I see them scoring more than once, and I don't see Huddersfield scoring more than once. So whether or not there's a win, I think it's been like 11 straight games now. At 11 straight Huddersfield home games, a team has gotten a clean sheet. So I do think that's a viable thing to shoot for this slate, and I do think that's probably on the back of Fabianski. But in terms of a really solid forward play in either format this slate, you can very solidly roll with Arnautovic because yeah, we'll get there to the Crystal Palace Tottenham game, I should say. We'll get there with Harry Kane. But yeah, let's say 3-0 West Ham. Next game on the slate, we have Burnley traveling to Leicester. So this is Leicester's first home game following the helicopter crash death of their owner, the previous home game following the completion of the game. So I can't imagine a scenario here where this isn't going to be one of the more emotionally charged games of not only the season, but probably of our lifetime. Hopefully, anyways. You never really like these reasons. So in terms of Leicester v. Burnley, there's a lot of things to go for here. I'm not exactly thrilled about Schmeichel's salary being the most expensive keeper of the week, but at the same time, prices are really low this slate in terms of top-end salary. Like the top keeper's only 5.4K. Harry Kane's only 10.8K. He's not even 11K. And the next most expensive is all the way down at 9K. So it isn't like you're asking the world from 5.4K, but at the same time, you have to ask basically what is he at the top keeper play of the slate. And there's nothing to suggest whatsoever that Leicester are a clean sheet unless you want to buy into this super emotionally charged narrative. But even in that case, that isn't really something you want to base a 5.4K salary on DraftKings over. Now on FanDuel, it's a totally different situation where it's only 4.5K, and you can rely on the fact that Burnley is literally one of the worst defenses in the league at the moment, and definitely the worst defense over the last 5 games in the entire league. Burnley have allowed an astronomical amount of goals, basically more than 4 goals in 3 straight games. This is technically new for Burnley, as they've always been known as a defensive team, but at the same time, this is absolutely nothing new. It was the situation at the beginning of the season too, and I'm surprised that it took this long to turn back into a potential blowout every single game for the opposition. So considering Burnley are away and they're playing a team that should be up for it, like, they've allowed the most shots in the league, but they're not even close to getting the most saves in the league. They don't really have viable stacking defenders. Letton's not bad, but like this is like Hader Gajong floor without Hader Gajong upside, which isn't really an upside. Kevin Long. Now, one thing I do want to talk about this slate, actually, one of my favorite points this slate, and I touch more in-depthly on in my article this week, which will be up shortly after the video on RotoPros.com. If you go to the top right-hand corner under articles and under soccer, you'll see it there. I'm hunting for center back goals this slate, and I'm pretty positive there's going to be a center back goal coming from the Burnley Leicester game. So that's something I'm willing to bank on. I'm very bullish about this, mostly because there's a few underpriced players that are coming in, not necessarily on DraftKings, but on FanDuel. And more importantly, there's just mispricings on both sites where the Leicester defenders are a little bit too expensive, which is saying something, and the Burnley defenders are way too cheap on FanDuel, giving us actually both defenders, center backs, are way too cheap on FanDuel, giving us super options here. So basically, to break this down, Kevin Long should be coming in for Tarkowski. So immediately you can tell DraftKings has already priced this up massively, and I'll get to why in another minute here. Sorry. And in terms of Wes Morgan's going to be coming back from suspension, so he'll be in for 90 minutes. Ben Mee is legitimately one of the most underrated defensemen in the league, and he's consistently priced around 3K. Don't get me wrong, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that he is going to do all these great things every single slate, but in terms of not correlating his real-life play to DFS relevance, Ben Mee is one of the most underrated players in the league. And one of my favorite GPP targets this slate is going to be, why can't I see him here? Yeah, Johnny Evans at 3.7K. This isn't necessarily a DraftKings play. This is absolutely a FanDuel play. Now, Johnny Evans should be coming into play here for the injured Harry Maguire. Harry Maguire hurt his leg pretty bad last game. So as you can see, Johnny Evans is an abysmal 4K nothing on FanDuel. And if he does, in fact, get the start, this is basically a multi-format lock. Absolutely 100%. Now, the biggest reason for this is because the main reason both these teams, defenders, in particular center backs, are priced slightly higher is because Ben Mee is also usually a 2.9K kind of player, is because the cross projection in this game is going to be absolutely through the roof. Both teams are lining up with players who consistently put out double-digit crosses, and both teams don't necessarily have the teams to prevent other teams from putting up any kind of cross counts. So ideally what you're looking at here is that defenders that are going to be making a ton of clearances and a ton of interceptions, and that's why you'll see Ben Mee is priced as the most expensive, second most expensive defender of the slate. And even then, you'll see Tarkowski was way up here as well because Burnley allow a ton of crosses. So at the same time, Robbie Brady and Johan Berg Goodmanson are two of the more effective and league-leading quantity crossers. So there's nothing to suggest that there shouldn't be mass cross counts this slate coming from this game, especially in the case of someone like Albrighton, who's put in 35 crosses in the past 2 games. Robbie Brady, who comes on the field and instantly starts taking corners, the set piece god, my namesake. So yeah, there's tons of crosses coming. These center backs are going to be working, and Johnny 4.K in FanDuel is easily the most mispriced player of this entire slate, and is an absolute lock in either slate on either format on FanDuel. Because of the mass amount of clearances that are going to be coming his way. And he also isn't inept at putting a ball in net. So I really like the center backs in this game. Also, Cal was the other player that was way too cheap down here as well. And Wes Morgan, the third player. Now, Wes Morgan isn't as productive as the other pair, But in terms of these two, you can very easily look at 15 to 20 fantasy points from a defender costing, and that's a FanDuel fantasy points from defenders costing bare bones minimum salary, allowing you to spend up really heavily at the midfield. And honestly, I know it isn't like the sharpest tool in the shed kind of play to go with this, but I do think this is cash viable because FanDuel has grossly underpriced these two players to the tune of 2 to 2.5K each. So, like, legitimately, you can roll with both of these guys in cash, and it isn't going to anti-correlate because they're both dealing with insane amount of crosses and allow you to spend up. There, that's my rant about the Leicester Burnley center backs, and I do think they're going to score. I think one of them is going to score, probably Johnny Evans. So yeah, going into the midfield, as I alluded, you can very easily game stack this. You're not giving up. These cross counts are absolutely. I haven't even got to someone like Wilfred Nidley, who's playing as arguably one of the better buy lows in the entire league at the moment. He's gotten shots in 3 straight games, 6 shots over the 3 games, playing excellent real life form, and on top of that, he's starting to just turn the tide in terms of converting that into DFS. So honestly, like, if you like 4.1K and you're like, I don't know what to do in cash, I don't know where to go, Nidley's absolutely viable in terms of a super value punt that we look at. It is actually more value at the his defensive peripherals are just excellent. And while that may not be scored as heavily on DraftKings, all you need is a tiny bit of uptick, and he's going from a half decent floor to someone that is allowing you to just basically get paid in cash. So this isn't, you know what? Yeah, go for it in GPP as well. Like Leicester, honestly, to me, this game have all the upside in the entire world. So really, like every single player sees an offensive uptick just because of the game script where they're going to be a little bit up for it, I guess you could say, in comparison to what they would normally be. So yeah, I have no problem with either side of this game. I prefer Schmeichel on FanDuel if you're going to play him. Definitely not on DraftKings. But there's not really a forward play outside of Jamie Vardy and Achino that really interests me very much from this game. Basically, all the Burnley forwards sub each other off at some point, so they're super, super unviable or non-viable to get involved with. But honestly, this pairing right here is one of my favorite GPP slate. I kind of look at as in NHL playing the first line center, second for dominant performance, which is very possible against this Burnley team, which is looking absolutely unable to prevent off going back. And whenever you look at this, on Jamie Vardy's little, but Achino is 5-0. Absolutely, and Achino do not play him in. Could say Jamie Vardy in cash for his in a game that finishes 2-2. I'm just missing anyone outside of it. Oh, I think outside borderline cash lob, given his forward role and for only 7.5K, almost basically going to just alone is something I'm interested in. Oh, I hope okay, good. And still here. Anyways, I'm going to be 3-4 nothing Leicester. But like I said on Fins and Kevin Locks in either format, really, this slate as fillers. In cash, you can use them as the punt low value plays because they're going to see incredible amount of crosses and be forced to make incredible amount of clearances in order to really come off as anything viable this game. It's not going to take very much work at all. So yeah, I'm going to say 2-0 Leicester win minimum. I really don't think Burnley are going to score, but I think Burnley will still do enough to give themselves a really steady floor across the board, which is kind of their thing. And really my main focus on DraftKings would be if Robbie Brady starts. Again, like, it's hard not to basically cash game stack this. Like, legit, I don't see any stretch of the imagination is this a good idea, but like getting 3 or 4 guys from this game into your cash cards isn't really that bad of a play. Clear up right here, like you're looking at literally 25 to 30 crosses, especially if Albrighton puts in anything over 10. Robbie Brady gets 90 minutes, and Johan gets at least 7 crosses. If you can get those 3 things to happen, you're looking at potentially 25 to 30 crosses because there's literally no limit right now to what Brighton can put out. And if James Mason set to miss this game, basically every attack Leicester do I will end up coming off, but in terms of Mark Albrighton, it's definitely where I am attention to in cash. In cash, the slate's really hard to look away from this game. I'm going to say 3-0 Leicester, but enough to get theirs. Bournemouth North to face Newcastle. Now, this is a really interesting game for a few different reasons. Especially because I think Newcastle win at home. Audi will be buying into this again, just like last slate. We can talk about Bournemouth first. First of all, Begovic just had enough goaltender this season to really rely on it consistently enough. Now, I know a lot of people are looking at the double digits there and saying, well, where's that coming from? And basically, that's coming from them playing really, really bad teams that don't score goals on them. Because if you immediately look at a team, for example, any team that like love to cross the ball, give Bournemouth be shown from Southampton. The 2 goals allowed in Man United, the big crossing team. Burnley lighting them up for 4. Like Burnley, if anyone game, this was Bournemouth was one of the heaviest favorites to the slate, and Callum Wilson was riding a massive goal streak. Everyone expected that, and again, like teams that cross them, some absolute nightmare. This isn't a game where I'm to click and lock in Bournemouth just because they're going against Newcastle, which I think is going to be a really popular script. So I'm not that interested in Begovic outside of the idea here that well, see, the thing about Newcastle is that they lead the league, or I should say they lead the top 3 in the league in the shots and chance create, bottom 3 in the league in both on both accounts. So yeah, really a lot to look for in terms of the ceiling. In terms, I guess you could make the missile out of the net castle. All country can't happen, absolutely. But just does script to me that I'm willing to buy into. And like Diego Rocco is really the DFS defender on Bournemouth, and he hasn't played since September. Junior Stanislas is coming back, and he is a very interesting play at 7K. But the big issue here is that, like I've been saying, and a lot of people have been telling me, and I knew I'd be, and I'm right. Sorry, I just so there. Fraser's halved. Junior Stanislas, is he still doing good, or still doing well? He's But with Junior Stanislaus coming back, he's basically vast majority of set pieces that Ryan Fraser up until this point had exclusive access to reach plus 20 fantasy points, which is what he's still priced at. Junior Stanislaus is also priced too high given the fact that Ryan Fraser technically taps into his production because Ryan Fraser ceases. The biggest concern I have here is that there's no way to really predict who's going to get the corners. Whatever side the ball outside the corners taken from. So literally do is try and find something that suggests 90% of the shots are going to come from this side. And if strikers are right foot shot, most likely the shots will end up going out in this fashion, and this is the side of the corner. Like, it's just not something that you can plug into. So where a lot of people are instantly going to be buying into the Bournemouth narrative, they've been awesome all season, and I'm not as bullish, except obviously on my main man, Callum Wilson. It's hard not to be all over Callum Wilson. He's second in the league behind Aguero in terms of points with goals and assists. He burned me a couple times this season, but in terms of players with upside this slate, there's not many better than Callum Wilson. And you can tell on FanDuel when you take a look at his price, and he's pressing the 10K with like the Jamie Vardy's. So, yeah, I think he makes for a very interesting play in either site. He is definitely one of my more favorable plays because Newcastle haven't been very good overall, but at the same time, in GPP, I think I'm going to be fading the Callum Wilson this slate just because I think the Newcastle offer a way sneaker more Dubraka's season. It's really low. So you really have to worry because technically against me just drained. Yeah, of where I'm really looking at this game on the Newcastle defensive side than the Bournemouth attack. Come on into this. Okay. I think we're back. I think we may be back. We may just not be able to so yeah, let's try this again. Newcastle. There we go. So yeah, he good all season, keeping scores relatively low. And while he may not have had like a crushing ceiling, his ownership's always so low that basically anytime you're getting points with them, you're the rarest of rare points on the board because you're not sharing those points with anyone else. So while 12 points may not be the most raw points of the slate, it's probably the lowest owned raw points of the slate. So I really have no issue with some Dubraka and GPP at home again this slate and looking for back-to-back wins because I think Bournemouth are going to be really highly owned. And like I said, they're not as viable as they used to be outside of Callum Wilson. Yedlin's pretty nice. Is getting a little bit expensive. Getting to the midfield, this is bare and bones for a lot of the things that you can do this slate that you know will be happening with. Like Matt Ritchie's going to be starting, and we'll be putting in close to double-digit crosses. A general certainty, and it'll 6.4K up against Bournemouth at home. Look much. You can drop down to EPP. I think he makes for AK. But really, where value plays that is going to be the day with Ki Sung Ying. Sorry. The situation with Ki is that he's the captain of the South Korean team, and he will take role. not necessarily the vocal point of the offense, but he will be the main focus for the from the defense forwards. And got an assist. That's a play. He was plugging a fantasy point, which if we can get around 9 fantasy points from him at 3.4K, to Bournemouth, who are hurt and just fairly far for cash. Get him. This is another situation. Kind of sides, especially GP not as bullet for Wilson and Cash, but in forward with Junior Stanis and Brian Frazier. Bournemouth lines up. Like I said, I know it's going to happen. No, absolutely. It's just one of my hitting a lot this season, and it definitely immediately Let's jump back into the screen share here and continue left off with the screen share again. Okay. Let's just keep going. I'll try and get some confirmation and see here to make sure it's still working. Doesn't look like it is, but continue on. Newcastle, I really like them to be so that is looking at here.